was once told a drink a day is good for you. I felt the need to make up for my early childhood. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tom Dowd, and I am an alcoholic. Until I wrote that line, I had never really admitted it. You can call it denial. I never went to Alcoholics Anonymous. Heaven knows I should have. On some days, I couldn't even spell AA. What I can tell you is I haven't had a drink in over 5 years. Alcohol wasn't simply an affliction that on far too many occasions brought pain on my family and on me. It was two competing personalities in one body. The alcoholic and engaging booze doctor, and the shy and timid Tom trying to break free from being holed up as an introvert. Aren't we all under some type of influence? Rather than getting over an addiction, is there potential to channel it and find support to turn some addictive behaviors into something positive? What's your addiction? Some are more overpowering than others and steer us into dark chocolate. I mean places. While other obsessions can influence our long-term dreams. Not every dependence is harmful, but when the light at the end of the tunnel is a train, we may want to switch tracks. My problem wasn't drinking. It was thinking. For me, it was liquid courage. I never found a karaoke bar I didn't like after 5 beers. Regrets? I've had a few. 4 years of college. One long blur. I did get a degree. And a girlfriend. Along with this unfortunate butterfly tattoo. I'm kidding about the girlfriend. I did eventually get married, had 3 daughters, but in regards to one activity, never left college. My 3 favorite holidays were New Year's Eve, St. Patrick's Day, and my birthday. Nothing like waking up in a pool of your own regret, hearing a little angelic voice saying, "Mommy, Daddy's not feeling well again." Have you ever had to apologize to your boss the next day? I have. Multiple times. When I wasn't drinking, I looked normal on the outside. Inside, my brain rattled with guilt and embarrassment for stupid things I didn't even remember saying or doing. These feelings ran parallel with the adrenaline that surged me towards the next binge where Booze Doctor found his prescription. It didn't feel like a chemical dependency. It felt more like a security blanket of confidence, enabling me to be the personable and social guy sober Tom wanted to be. 3 different doctors told me I had elevated liver counts. My solution? Change doctors. La 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 la. Avoidance. Like turning the car radio up when your engine's clanking. On a hot summer night, with my wife and close friends, I drank a 6-pack before the concert. The doctor was in the house. I was shuffled off by these same friends and a mortified wife before the second set started. The next morning was different. No one died. No conflict coming to a head. Another excruciating hangover and for a look. Okay, guys, we've all had the look. This one was unrecognizable. It wasn't even sad, angry, or disappointed. No tears. Its utter emptiness is what made it so impenetrable. I can't explain it. I wish I could. After all these years, it was a look she had never given me before. No words were needed. It was time to change. My obsessive behaviors didn't have to be channeled into drinks. Her mysterious look overtook any chemical grip alcohol had on me. It may have nudged me closer to the honey-do list. Bartender, I'm kicking myself out. I focus my energy on family, work, and Toastmasters. Toastmasters was the final supportive shot I needed. It turned me from a shy drinker to a social thinker. I surged ahead with each speech, moving forward without stumbling or slurring. Unless it's tabletop. Tell them what you've won, Tommy. Self-therapy by sharing vulnerabilities, shots of adrenaline, confidence to be social, and a clear head the next day. I'm in for a lifetime of vigilance. Drink responsibly? I can't. I'm a binge drinker. But I can finally take it in. My wife's look was my wake-up call to channel my consumption, support, and drive into something constructive. I'll ask again. What's your addiction? I want you to turn to someone you love and look them in the eyes. Are you waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder telling you it's time to change? Stop waiting. It's not behind you. It's in front of you. Feel the gaze. I am under the influence. The influence of a supportive group of people helping each other to become better each day and to love themselves. I didn't get over an addiction. I channeled it into something positive. Can you? Hey, bartender. You can have your stool back. Thank you. What'd you think?
Interesting with the different kind of elements. It seemed like there was some, what the acting and all. That's something I considered before.
The Toastmasters judges, the Toastmasters competition has morphed over many, many years from a lectern speech into a lot more theatrics. So there's a lot more scoring on gestures and voice inflections and content. All of that plays into the total scoring, so it ends up being more of a short one-act play. Well, that's a good observation. What other comments?
It's very different from what we usually do. We usually go to either like the podium or stand on the steps, and we really focus on projecting, and you kind of moved all around the stage, and it was just a different perspective. It was cool.
Yeah, and there's different elements to it. And there are, as you are progressing as a speaker, you start to pick up on, your mind is doing things while you're speaking. And when you get control of what's going on in your head and your body, when you start getting more control over that, you can start expanding out. So that's why a lot of people stand at the lectern. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with being at the lectern. It's just if you have the opportunity to show your whole self, to allow emotions to come into it, to be more interactive with the audience. There's a reason why I use the stage is to engage this side of the audience and then this one, to make sure that everyone feels as if they're a part of it. But that only comes with the maturity of speaking. And so you bring up some good points yourself, and that once you start to figure out, okay, I can use some voice inflection here. Maybe I can start working on some of my facial expressions. Maybe I can use some gestures, and gestures go beyond just the hands. Start using more of your body to show what's going on. People can start seeing more of a whole picture and can start visualizing what's happening in your story. And because what you're doing is you're trying to take what's in a book, this imagination, you're trying to bring that alive for someone and turn it into that movie that they can see. And cut down on the messaging that's out there, but make sure that people can see you as a speaker. And there's some interesting pieces about maturing as a speaker. When most people start, they're what I like to call selfish speakers. And what do you think I mean by being a selfish speaker?
They're trying to get as much information out for the audience.
Yeah, my information, and I want to share it with you. I want to just throw it at you. And so your message is all about you. It's that you piece of it. And it's also, how do I look? little bit of that selfishness coming in. How do I look? You probably all just looked at my shoes, dude. But it's how do I look? How do I feel? And my gut reaction when I'm done with this is, how did I do? I. But what happens is, as you mature as a speaker, you stop figuring out, how did I do? And my question in my head is now turned to, I hope you were able to get something out of it. Were you able to get something out of it? Did this relate? Understanding the target audience for this particular speech is for Toastmasters. There were a couple of Toastmasters references. Outside of those references, could you find some way for this to relate to you? Nobody? Okay. I mean, you might know some alcoholics, you may be one yourself, you may be Irish like I am, whatever it may be, you're going to have some pieces that are out there that could run in your family, you should know someone who did it, maybe some drunk driving comes into this, and all of a sudden, at some point, hopefully it's a message that would resonate to enough people and relate, and if it doesn't, again, understanding my target audience is different than who you are, but you want to send a message that can relate to enough people, and that comes only when you understand who your audience is. And if you don't know, ask. So if you're, right now, you're speaking to fellow students, you say, okay, here's my topic, I know who the students are, I have to relate to a younger generation, I have to relate to different demographics, okay, there's going to be males and females there, okay, I get it. And you'll start to get into a nice little rhythm of who your audience is, but you're going to be shocked when you go outside into the real world and someone says you have to present to this business audience. It's not the same audience anymore. And you have to ask the question, who is my audience? And so the audience itself is going to change, and you have to morph it along with it, and you only get there successfully when you start to say, I can't just thrust my message onto them anymore. I have to understand who they are and adapt my message. Maybe my core message doesn't change, but how I deliver it, who I'm delivering it to. I gave a presentation for a women's group on generational differences. It went extremely well. And someone called me up and said, I want to pay you some money to come speak to our group. Same message, but it's a bunch of HR professionals. See how the audience changes? I can't just say, oh, there's a bunch of Gen Y and Gen X in here. Here's all the assumptions about them. I have to do it in a way of, you are now a recruiter or a hiring manager. Here are some of the things that you should expect to see from this different generation. So you have to start asking those types of questions. And that's how, over time, and a lot of people never get there, but over time it comes from the selfish speaker to a selfless speaker. So let's go back to the presentation itself. Well, let's just boil it down. We'll start with the introduction. How did I start the speech? Okay. What were your initial thoughts with me not facing you?
What are you doing?
Yeah. Audience is here, dude. Yeah. I gave that presentation at a Toastmasters meeting. It was just a regular meeting, but some guy walked in after. He walked in probably about 5 minutes into the 7-minute speech. And he was a guest, so we always ask the guests in the meeting, what did you think about the meeting overall? And he said, I had no idea what I was walking into. I said, did you think you walked into an AA meeting? And he said, uh-huh. So yeah, you have this thought. And why do you think I start with my back to the crowd? I tell you never to do that on stage.
Engage me more, so I was interested.
You're going to have, the intention is to have you, the audience, have a little bit of uncertainty and surprise. The one thing you have to be careful when it comes to uncertainty and surprise is you can't carry that surprise all the way through where people spend the next 7 minutes trying to guess what you're trying to do. So a good example of that is if I had this stool sitting here, but I didn't touch it or go near it for say 5 to 7 minutes, for 5 to 7 minutes, you would be going in your head, what's that sitting there for? And you can potentially get completely off the mark and what I'm talking about. And I might even lose your attention because you're going to be saying, well, what's he going to do with that? So I'm sitting on it, and the surprise for you lasts only for a second, because then I'm singing. I know not very well, but I know I'm singing, and I turn, and now the introduction through song, because I bet you didn't think you were going to see a singer today, and I would never describe myself as a singer, but in this particular case, I sang a little bit, and now you're saying, what the heck is this guy doing? So let's go to the conclusion, because when you have a start, there are three major parts of the speech: your introduction, your conclusion, and the body that supports it. So the ending then. How did it end? Who did I reference in the last part of this again? That memorable of a speech, huh? Okay, the audience. So I brought you back into it, and then I pointed to the bartender and I said, you can have your stool back. Full circle now. Audience is re-engaged, even if you dropped out somewhere in between. You got brought back in whether you liked it or not. And there was a reference. So that bartender became the string that was all the way through. And so he was part of the story. What's the bartender look like? Anyone know? Do you care? Is bartender male or female? Does it matter? No. And so this is a lesson in irrelevant details that you don't need. There are certain details in a speech that don't have to be there. We always talk about vivid character descriptions and the use of language. The bartender didn't need it. The bartender just needed to be a point in the story. And as a reference point, you just needed to know that there was one. It's not relevant whether it's a him or a her, not relevant what he or she looked like. It was just that they were there. And they became a focal point to just bring you back to where you are in reality as part of the introduction and the conclusion. So the introduction and conclusion were full circle. We came back and tied the knot so people knew where we were. So then you have the content. We'll get to the content in just a minute. But let's talk about voice inflection. Was there voice inflection? Okay, what type of voice inflection was it? Changes in volume? When I get a little softer in my voice, what's it do for an audience? Besides put you to sleep. You're going to actually do this. You may not physically do this, but your head's saying, I've got to pay closer attention to that. So it's an engagement tool whether you like it or not. And it's not, I'm not calling out the audience. All of a sudden, if I do it right, you should be able to do this. I can't go too low that you can't hear me. And in contests, at certain levels, you start to get amplification, which actually plays to my advantage. I can almost go down to a whisper in some cases, so it will work. So you have volume changes. Were there any pitch changes? A little bit, a little pitchy in the song. There was some pitching. That's in there. A range. Was there a range? High and low. A little angelic voice. Did you feel as if there was a child speaking? Understanding I can't get that high in my voice. Okay. So, would you agree that there was voice inflection that was there? Okay. And so again, as a tool, when I've gotten feedback from, and I've talked to probably 3 or 4 world champions of public speaking, and one of the things that they talk about a lot is sameness. Where most people fail is they have the sameness, and they just talk. They walk through the content of a speech, and they have very few movement in their range. And there's an opportunity when you think about it, because the first time I did a speech that was worthy of being in a competition, someone said, you need to use a character's voice. I said, I'm not going to use a character's voice. That's not who I am. But you start to realize that it doesn't necessarily have to be a character voice. versus a simple distinction between the person who's speaking. So you might say, you might have two people talking to each other, and you might just take it down a notch and you speak to this person here, and then come over here and change your voice just enough, high, low, volume, range, whatever pitch, whatever it may be, and talk back to this person so the audience can understand it's two different people that are speaking, or two different characters, and they need to understand that. So it's not necessarily about going deep into a character voice versus understanding that the audience can understand that there are two different people that are speaking at the same time. So gestures. What do you think of the gestures? Do you like them? Not like them? Irrelevant?
Well, I think that perhaps that's like the correctness check.
Okay. Yeah, I had somebody, before they gave me feedback, they said, in the beginning, when you did that, how close was that? How much of an exaggeration was that to reality? Because he said, it's potentially, you're walking a very fine line and going over the top in acting. And I turned to him and I said, that's 100% who I was. So to me, I'm reliving those moments, and I'm comfortable because that is me. And so there's exaggeration, there are pieces of exaggeration within the speech to emphasize points in the story, but those gestures in the beginning were not one of them, believe it or not. But what are the dangers of gestures? So they may not match some of the content you're talking about. What else?
They can be distracting.
They can be distracting. In what ways?
When you said the numbers, if you held up like 5 fingers, and 4 and 3, my eyes went to your fingers and I wasn't listening.
Okay.
But that's just me. I get
So without me saying a word, what number do I have?
3.
Okay. Just kidding.
But I mean, that's just.
But it's an interesting point because, again, remember, selfish and selfless. As a selfless speaker, I want you to understand what I'm talking about, because in reality, this is about you. But if you are thinking in terms of, if you're looking at this the whole time, and I didn't define what this thing is yet, or how it was going to be used in the speech, you might be paying attention to that, and your mind might be lost somewhere, and I'm over here, and your eyes aren't on me. And so you do want to keep the eyes on you in order to have them more intake the volume of your speech, your voice inflections, to be able to see the facial gestures that you have them. So I wouldn't emphasize, if I'm doing this, facial expressions. I'll give you one, but my emphasis is going to be on that. I'm okay with this. If you take your eyes off of me, this is within my sphere, I'm okay with that. If your eyes are over here, that's a problem. Very first speech I gave in a major competition, one speech away from the World Semifinals. A friend of mine passed away from cystic fibrosis. And so I made a couple mistakes. I had 2 posters of him, and I showed this blank page. Just this, all you saw was the back of this board, and it was poster size. All you see was this white. And so people kept saying, when's he going to turn this thing? In their head. The whole time they're saying, when is he going to turn it? And when I turned it, what did I do? I turned your book into the movie and you ruined it for me. Because in my head, I knew who Jack was. He was 4'11" with this 5-foot smile, and you described him in a way with the words, and then you just ruined it with this little real picture of him. And so what happens is everybody's eyes turn to, oh, that's what Jack really looks like. And so Jack's poster is over there. I'm over here talking, and half the eyes are still over there. So you're right. Props and gestures you have to be very careful of because they can be distracting. And I am intentionally walking a very fine line when it comes to gestures. I don't want to call it annoyance. Hopefully I'm not annoying the audience. But I want to make sure that you're not so caught up in the gestures that you lose sight of the content and the message that's in there, because that's the majority of what the speech is, and then the scoring side of it, 50% of it is based off of the content. but I don't want to lose you while you're there. So it's very important. But one of the reasons why I do gestures is, first speech, again, I'm showing these posters and everything. Here's my natural stance when I first started. Straight, uptight, shoulders. And this was my stance as I gave a 7-minute speech. Well, they said, Tom, you should walk around a little bit. Loosen up, dude. So I started doing this. This becomes a little distracting. But what happens is, I found a happy medium over time. And that happy medium over time is, I'm okay having a conversation with you as the audience. And if I do this right, I should be having a conversation with you and not talking at you. But anytime I have something important to say, I'm going to stop. And when I stop, there's a message that's in here that I hope can resonate or relate to you. So where was the bartender in all of this story? Did he ever move? He or she ever move? Where was he or she? So you may not remember the exact words that I said, but you will remember there was a bartender in the story. You will remember where that bartender was. And therefore, it may start to pull you back into what the actual message of this speech was. And you will start to remember there was a bartender. It was some guy, I don't even remember his name, Tony, I don't remember. But he was talking about alcohol, and all of a sudden it starts coming back. And you start to figure out, oh wait, alcohol addiction, oh, it wasn't just about alcohol addiction, it was about other addictions. Okay, and you start pulling that string a little bit further through. And that's what part of this is about, is where you are on stage. If you deliver a poignant point, people will remember where you were on stage, potentially. Therefore, remember what you were saying at that moment in the story, and then I will eventually get back to the message that was out there, and that becomes the core of the speech. So we've talked about voice inflections, we've talked about gestures. What about facial expressions? Did I use my face?
Talking about that look, you use it to illustrate a little bit of the kind of what you expect.
Okay. So there's
strain and then it went away.
It was subtle. Well, maybe it was more than subtle, but the wife's look. So I have this pain look. Maybe you can see it or you can't, and I come up slowly, and you see her look. And then there's a subtle difference somewhere over here, and I'll say, okay, guys, we all know the look. And I'll change the look on my face just a little bit so you can see what the intent was, so you can see a difference between the face. And not everybody's going to pick up on those, but there are times where, was I smiling at all anywhere in that speech? 1, 2, maybe 3 places. Couple. Was I happy, drunk, and some? You should see me at karaoke. But when there was a smile or an intended smile, I'll actually go back and I'll check the tape to see if there was. And if there's not, I probably need a few more. Because part of that is, I'm taking you on a roller coaster ride with this particular speech. And humor is not intended to be in all speeches. My wife says I'm not funny, so I try not to be. But there are a couple of pieces where there are some tense moments in the speech. There's probably even some pieces in there that you're not comfortable hearing. Or maybe it hits home, or it's too close to you. Or maybe you know someone who's along those lines, or at least that's the intention with my target audience. And I've given that speech to Rotaries and Lions and Toastmasters, and every single time I've given a speech, at least one person has come up to me and said, I know an alcoholic, and share a story with me that goes along with it. So I know I at least hit one person that's there. But when you hear the story, it hits home for someone. And it's not always comfortable. In fact, at my Toastmasters meeting, there's a woman who has now seen the speech 3 times. And she said, Tom, every time you do that, I dislike you more. And more. And more. And she said, I really like you, Tom. But your character on stage, I don't like because it hits way too close to home. And in fact, the third time you gave it, I really disliked you on stage. And I said, does that mean I hit the right chords? And she said, oh yeah, you hit the right chords. And it's about hitting those chords, but the reason why I bring up the facial expressions, you have the ability to cut the tension with a knife or ease up that tension just a little bit on the roller coaster. So what happens as you're clanking up a hill on a roller coaster? You hear the click, 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 and then you get to the top, and then you're like, woo! And you start doing whoop-de-loops. And it's that type of feeling. I want you on this roller coaster ride with me. And if I have some tension, I'm going to ease it up enough so you can take a breath. You might not have laughed. Were there a couple moments where you at least said, okay, he's attempting to be funny? Can I at least honestly say that? Okay. And by the way, you're invited to laugh. My wife never does, but you're invited to laugh. And even if you don't get a laugh, and this was a big lesson for me, I would give a humorous speech for a contest, and I'd get 0 reaction. None. 0 laugh in a humorous speech contest. And I'd say, what the heck just happened? And people would come up after and like, Tom, you were hilarious. You didn't show it. But I saw some smirks. And I saw some people doing this. And I saw some people who weren't necessarily invited to laugh yet. So there were a couple lessons that I've learned in those situations. One, you can invite the audience to come along with you and laugh. So you can stop maybe a little bit longer. You can give a little nod. You can say, do something like that to pull them in. And I didn't do a lot of that because of the serious nature of the speech. And I wasn't looking for a big laugh. But I heard a couple chuckles out there, and I saw some faces that turned with a little bit of a smirk that I knew I got your attention. And that is enough of the easing of the tension for me to keep moving forward, to bring you back onto the dip in the roller coaster ride again. So there are some pieces that are in there. And you can use humor. What's humor do for an audience? Keeps them involved. Keeps them engaged. You're emotionally connecting to them. Well, actually remember the speech a little bit more. If there's humor, if they're a little bit more relaxed. So if you can relax the audience, you don't want them at the top of this hill waiting for 7 minutes for them to drop. You want to take them along with them every once in a while. You want to have the right conversations with people that they're kind of, all right, I get this, I can loosen up, and they'll remember it a little bit more. So humor does do that. Not every speech needs to have humor. But you do need to have them think. You want to have your audience think about what you're speaking about. You want to make sure that you're emotionally connecting with the audience. And what do I mean by emotionally connecting with the audience? My name is Tom Dowd, and I'm giving a required speech for my public speaking class. Thank you all for attending. Did I emotionally connect to you? My name is Tom Dowd, and I am here as a guest. Thank you for having me. And I am about to give you a speech that I plan to give in a speech competition. And I plan on taking you on this roller coaster ride from up high down to low, and we're going to share some emotions. We're going to bring you to the highs of happiness and success and the lows of hitting yourself and finding yourself in a gut. Is that a little bit change in pitch and voice and tone and stage? Find a way to emotionally connect to it. And you start bringing in content, again, relating back to the audience that can emotionally connect. And it's important to do that because guess what? We all share the same emotions. Have you ever been happy? So have you ever cried? So have I. Have you ever been angry? Have you ever been tense? Have you ever been frustrated? All of this is emotion, and we've all had those same emotions. So if you've been happy and other people you know have been happy in life, you can make them happy. You're sharing happiness with people. You're sharing success with people. You're sharing failures. And people may not have the same story that you have or background, but you can still emotionally connect. I gave a speech on animal rescue. And my dog's name is Kevin. And Kevin's still alive. But Kevin has this nice story of, in Louisiana, left in a car, 98-degree weather, taken away by an animal control officer, after begging and pleading and paying fines, taken back 2 weeks later, gets involved in a drunk driving accident with the owner, with him in the car. He flies out the window. He's on his deathbed, euthanasia. It was on his fingertips. They were about to put the shot in him, and we rescued him from Louisiana. So there's some stories that are in there. You may be a cat lover, but I can still touch that chord. Whether it's animals, whether it's on the verge of death, whether it's about happiness of rescue, somewhere in there, and I just gave you a 7-minute speech in 30 seconds, in there, oh yeah, then he came home and then had heartworm, bed rest for a lab mix for 6 weeks. Yeah, that worked out well. So all these little pieces in the story bring you on that roller coaster ride of emotionally connecting with the audience. You might be a cat lover, but you can at least understand what's going on for someone who loves a dog. Would you agree? Okay. And that's emotionally connecting with the audience. So when it comes to content, you want to have strong introduction, strong conclusion, and within the body, in a 7-minute speech, you want to reference probably 3 stories or so that are in there. And stories are important because they share the message for you. And people can personally relate to stories. And when they relate to a story, they'll remember the message. So if you want to say, you shouldn't drink, that wasn't my message. But it might come across that way. The message in reality is internally look at your own obsessions and say, are you using them for good? And if you're not, can you rethink it and possibly put those obsessive behaviors into another track for you to go down a different path? That's ultimately the message. But I just told you the entire message, but I didn't share any stories with you. You're going to walk away saying, this dude was lecturing me about not drinking, and no. But that's what you're going to walk away with until I share the stories with you. And the stories come about of someone who has gone through these and who has lived this, and then all of a sudden, now I have to mature a little bit. I've got 3 girls who are now teenagers now, so you guys figure it out. But you get these, so I've got 3 girls, and I'm not being this mature person I needed to be. And I just happened to come across Toastmasters. And Toastmasters changed the course of my life and career. And I'll share that story in just a moment. And so now you're starting to see, oh, well, Toastmasters, you may or may not be in Toastmasters, but you can start to relate of, all right, he used something, this obsessive behavior of he has to do something to go to Toastmasters. And so he went to Toastmasters and used it to his advantage. And that's what he chose to do. And so those stories get pulled through, and that becomes part of the content. And now you remember the stories, and thus you remember the message. So that becomes the whole package. So before we wrap up this piece of the speech itself, any questions or comments or additional feedback you have?
I have a question and an observation. I too had the experience of the feeling of a one-act play. I'm also interested in, is it because you're doing a professional presentation that you wore a suit? I'm interested in your choice of the suit.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and we were talking about it at the club meeting the other day, because it actually creates a disconnect. And somebody was saying, well, put a rack up, and then you can put your tie and jacket on later in the speech when you found Toastmasters. And at that point, I was overcomplicating the whole process, because remember, distractions and gestures and movement, I felt there was too much that was going on. The expectations are, from the judges, that if you are not, unless your costume, and I'll use that very loosely, if your costume is not a direct result of that absolutely supports your message, you're always going to be better off in a suit and tie if you're a guy or dressed nicely as a woman. And it's important because I've thought about this a lot now. Like I don't know what I'd wear. I know what I'd wear to a bar, but I didn't care what I wore to a bar as long as I was going to a bar. So, if I wore something else, your direct connection, again, this is back to the connection of the audience, would I directly have my message supported by what I'm wearing with the audience? And I couldn't find a consistent way to deliver that message in what I was wearing. Now, my humor speech contest from this past fall, I did it on a knee operation that I had. And a lot of things went wrong, a lot of funny things were happening along the way. And when you're in a small town and you're having an operation, everyone seems to know. But the most uncomfortable part for me was wearing the Johnny, the hospital gown. And so I wore sweatpants and a sweatshirt. And then I got to a part midway through the speech and I disrobed into a Johnny. And so I'm wearing this Johnny. And the looks on the faces of people in the crowd were... And I don't think it ever left for the next 3 minutes while I was wearing this Johnny. So I'm walking around, and they're looking at my knees. And so I had socks up to here. So I'm walking around with these socks pulled up to my knees and wearing a Johnny. And it was very supportive of the content of the speech. So it fit in nicely. And then towards the end, one of the things is they actually wrote "cut here" on my leg. So I had in very big 3-inch letters "cut here" with an arrow pointing to my knee. And the audience got a decent chuckle out of that. So I pulled the socks down. So the wardrobe itself was very supportive of the content. With the alcohol, there are a variety of alcoholics out there. There are those that are in the gutter. There are homeless all the way up to CEOs and people who make billions of dollars a year who are alcoholics. And it didn't matter. And so I couldn't not confuse you, but so I'm playing the safer bet by wearing the suit and tie. We'll see how it plays out. I wore a flannel shirt to a speech at the equivalent of state finals. I didn't know what the judges wanted. I was just giving a speech. I showed up in a flannel shirt and pants, and guys were like, "Don't you ever show up to a speech contest again without a suit and tie on." Okay. Understanding he was way to the other side of the spectrum, but I did find that you have to be thoughtful in what you're wearing. And part of being thoughtful of what you're wearing is anxiety and fear. Anyone get anxious before they get up on the stage? Everybody gets it. Everybody, whether it's shakes, sweats, heart pounding, whatever it may be, you're going to get some feeling in your head and your body. And there are physical and mental pieces of speaking, and we all know that. The question is, what are you going to do about it? And part of that is preparing, making sure that you are prepared. It means getting to the room and controlling the things that you can control. If you do have control over the lights, if you have control over the heat, I like my rooms just a little bit colder. The seating arrangement, can't control this, but I've been to many seating arrangements where they've had tables with chairs around them. I said, who knew? No, and I moved the tables and we set up different seating. Or vice versa, I need people to take notes, so I want to give them the opportunity to do the table. So I get there early so I can control as much as I can as a speaker. It makes me feel a whole lot better. This is a brand new suit. My wife bought it for me because she says that I don't dress well. And I haven't had a new piece of clothes in probably 25 years. She's probably thought I've given up and I'm no longer trying. But she bought a suit. I asked for a suit. My suit was getting a little older. And I'm going to be in a speech competition. The last thing I want to happen when I'm standing on stage is to have the first thought that goes through my head is, it's kind of tight. Or, my tie's flipping out. How do I deal with the tie? Or, this one, where I'm sitting down on my tails. And then all of a sudden my arms are caught here. So you have to practice through that stuff. And so when I was wearing the Johnny, I practiced an awful lot with the Johnny and taking on and off the shoes and putting this on and off. And believe it or not, I'm practicing with the suits. I've been practicing with the suits for a couple weeks now. The competitions will continue to go over the next few weeks. Because I need to know, how do I deal with something like, I can't even get it to do it now, do something like that. And I can subtly do this without overthinking it. Because what happens when you start thinking about it? So I am Irish Catholic. That's where the alcoholism comes from Boston. Anyone see that I have a red face? Do I have one now? Can you tell? Probably. This thing, this red face, this heat. Anyone else go through those symptoms where the heat just comes up on your neck, in your ears, and in your face? Well, that's always happening. It is never going away. Ever. That's who I am. It's in the blood, literally. So I can't break away from it. But when I was speaking, the first thought that came to mind is, here it comes again. It was, oh, I'm feeling warm now. As soon as I think those thoughts, what am I doing? What's happening? My mind's going elsewhere. And am I a selfish speaker at that point or selfless? Selfish. Because I'm saying, how do I look? How do I feel? Oh, here it comes again. And as soon as I get off a point on what my message is, and this isn't about memorizing. This is about what your thought process. My thought process should be you, the audience. And as soon as I say, how do I look? How do I feel? And I'm thinking, here it comes. I've lost sight of you, my audience. And it takes practice and preparation. Practice with the suit on so I'm not thinking about it. Getting here early to make sure I'm prepared to where I am, to the environment. Getting myself very comfortable so when I do deliver the speech, you are my focal point. Until I just said this, I never think about this, ever. Until I'm actually talking to a class about getting red in the face. I don't care anymore. Because it's not a thought. It might or it might not distract from you. I don't know. I can't control it. So I'm going to stick to the things that I can control. So just on the Toastmasters piece here, the Toastmasters International, there's a club here at Tom's College. It's run by Dowd Wallace, is the president right now. And the reason it changed my life and career is I joined it purely for resume writing, to put it on my resume and just add something new to my resume. My company was 28,000, grew to 285,000 overnight after we were acquired. And I was on a task force and a redundant role, and I felt like I was going to lose my job. So I had to boost my resume. I was also a communication major in college and told for 20 years on my performance appraisals I couldn't communicate. I joined for false reasons. I stayed for the real reason. I didn't have communication issues. I had confidence issues. And within 3 months, my confidence went through the roof. And this is not, I highly endorse Toastmasters, but it may not be for you. But the point is, you have to figure out what your symptoms are. You need to figure out what you need to work on and work on them. I needed to work on my confidence. So I prepared every single day. While I was driving to work, I practiced speeches. When I was having a one-on-one with my managers, I put in motion the message I wanted to send to my manager every single day. And I got comfortable with thinking quickly on my feet, which has been an Achilles heel of mine forever. And I would talk on forever and ever and ever when someone only wanted a yes-no answer. And you start to realize, you start to understand, and Toastmasters has taught me to be a better listener. As a public speaker, did anyone think that listening was a critical skill in public speaking? It is when it comes to Q&A, and also listening with your eyes. I know you guys didn't laugh a lot during my speech. I'm okay. But I could see a couple people smirking, and I found some people in the audience that were absolutely engaged. There were some that were sleeping. I'm okay. But you focus in on the people that are giving you the attention that you're looking for. I'm not looking for attention, but the people that are really engaged, and live off of that. And so things that I've learned from Toastmasters. I learned to think quicker on my feet. I learned time management. I learned to get a point across in very few sentences. And that's very important. So, yes?
When you practice, do you practice in front of a mirror? Do you practice in front of your wife, your daughters? Do you practice, how do you practice?
Yes, 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 and yes. I practice in front of my dental hygienist while I'm waiting.
In front of Kevin?
I've been in front of Kevin. I step over Kevin, and Kevin is a howler, by the way. He's like, "Arr!" And as soon as he hears piano or music, I practice while my children are playing the trombone, the piano. Did you hear the construction going on out here during the speech? So did I. Not a big deal. I was in a speech competition. There was a jackhammer going off behind me, and that is a literal jackhammer. And I was thrown. And from that point forward, I changed my practice routines, because all I was doing practicing was I would practice in the car. So I knew my speech left and right. Where I was in the speech, where I was on the street. So I knew as soon as I passed a sign, I should be at this point, and that's great. Well, what happens when you're up on stage and you're no longer in the car? I had no control over my environment anymore. I lost whatever comfort level I had. So I now practice in front of my dog, a cat, if you want to throw a cat in front of me. I love when the phone rings. I love when the dog howls. I was on my way to Canada where the winner would go on to the World Semifinals. And I went my first 2 years in Toastmasters without practicing in front of my wife. Discomfort. Didn't want to embarrass myself in front of her. So I did the speech about Kevin, my dog, and rescuing animals. And I practiced it in front of her for the first time. It's a 7-minute speech. I did the speech in 5 minutes. I just ran through the words. And there's a line in there that's millions of dogs and cats. And I got so tongue-tied looking at my wife, I said millions of dogs and a cat. My wife couldn't stop laughing. She was on the floor. She was like, "This is great, you're hilarious." I was like, "Oh, me too." And I realized if I could do it in front of her, I could do it in front of anyone. And it actually increased my confidence level because she knew the effort I put in to get to that point. But to answer your original question is I practice in front of anyone who wants to hear. And I do a lot of practice in front of a mirror. I do the camera work as well. And there's two things you want to do if you do camera work. First of all, it becomes an audience member for you, and you get that rush of adrenaline or that uptight feeling. Good. Every time you get that uptight feeling, you knock a little piece of that corner off every time you speak. So if it's going to put that tension on you and you have to learn to get over it, put a camera in front of it. Two things you want to do with a camera. Well, three things. Watch it through and just give yourself feedback on it, because you will find things in there that you can't think that is happening while you're doing it. You also want to just listen to it. Turn away and listen for voice inflection. And you'll find a good chunk of the time early on is going to be sameness, that same voice throughout. And find if there are opportunities to change it. And then turn the volume off and just watch yourself. It's amazing what you pick up on. So here's my natural stance. And there's a natural stance. It should never be this. It should never be this for obvious reasons. It should never be this. It shows uptight. And so you're instantly saying, I'm uptight. So this is the natural stance. Some people say, take your thumb in your palm if you really need to do something with your hands while you're doing it. But early on, besides this being my initial natural stance, my other natural stance has become this. Did you see any of this while I was doing the speech? And it's subtle, this versus this. And I saw myself doing this either for two reasons. One, I was just uptight. Or two, I was getting ready for my next gesture and it becomes too obvious at that point. So I really had to pay attention to where I really wanted my hands without being this uptight. And so you have to, and so the camera allowed me to see something like that. I also saw that I was doing a lot of gestures with my right hand. So I did the number 4 years of college, with my left hand to make sure that you can see and the the number thing, back to your number thing, by the way. I just read an article that said if you have a number to say and you can do it all in one hand, why not? So I thought it was an interesting point that they were making. Like, don't hide it. Give someone another opportunity to learn different learning types throughout. So back to the Toastmasters story. So I joined to get some experience. I boosted my resume. I was told for 20 years I couldn't communicate. And this woman taps me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, Tom, come teach my managers how to communicate." I said, "Who? This guy that's been told for 20 years he can't communicate." And I put together this hour-long presentation, and we met, and things went pretty well. And this person that was there said, "Hey, can you come talk to my team about communicating?" So I went and I talked to them. And the guy's like, "That was fantastic. We got great feedback. What else do you have?" I've done a lot of interviews. I've done a lot of resumes. I just started doing a lot of networking. So I built some things around that. So we built a series that went on for 8 months. Well, unbeknownst to me, it made me eligible for the National Speakers Association. So I joined the National Speakers Association. This is some guy who's been told he can't communicate is now a member of the National Speakers Association. And I was competing. The first major competition I was in, I finished in 3rd place. It's not bad. Unless there's only 3 people in the competition and it's at your club level. And the guy who finished 2nd forgot that there was a speech contest and didn't practice his speech until about 45 minutes when he wrote it and then memorized it right then and there and finished in 2nd. After I'd been practicing for 6 months. Practicing the wrong way is not good practice, but I didn't ask for any feedback. I didn't get support. I didn't practice in front of the support system that was going to make me better. So I took an awful lot of feedback because those 2 that were moving on to the next level weren't able to go. So here I was, winning by default. The 3rd place finish. And so I ended up going to the next level and finishing in 2nd. Top 2 went on. So here I was at the state finals, taking feedback 2 weeks later, and now people are filling me with feedback. In the speech, one of the pieces of feedback was that speech about the dog was a letter I was reading to surprise you at the end that it was my dog. Well, first of all, they didn't like the surprise carried all the way through to the end because they lost me. I'd lost the audience towards the end. And I'm like, when's he going to get to whatever surprise this thing is going to be? And the other part was, great message, it took you 7 minutes to get there. And so now it became, put the message up front, carry some supporting information for that same message, and then end quickly with the same message. And it was an aha moment for me to say, whoa, those subtle changes got me to being 1 speech away from the world semifinal. Some guy who finished in 3rd place with just a couple subtle changes that were happening. And so now I am, the day of the competition, I go in to work out in the morning because the one thing when it comes to speaking is you want to stay within as much routine as you can. If you exercise, get the blood flowing. Don't throw yourself off and have some big bacon breakfast if that's something you don't do every day. It's again staying within routine and comfort to keep the anxiety down. I'm working out and there's a guy by the name of Joe there. And Joe had given a presentation about 6 months before at one of the training sessions. And I said, "Joe, this is fantastic meeting you. I saw you 6 months ago. You were fantastic. In fact, some of the things you taught, I'm using in the competition tonight." And he said, "Tom, good luck. I hope it works out for you." I said, "Joe, are you competing tonight?" I said, Oh. My confidence shot. So now I'm sitting at lunch, and they make an announcement. There's 200 people here. We were in Canada. They said 180 of them are Canadian. Well, all of my statistics on animal rescue were from the American Humane Society. I was no longer relating to my audience. So I turned to this guy, "Do you think I need to change my speech?" He said, "You're a judge, aren't you?" He said, turned to the other person, they said, don't ask, yes. So now I'm changing parts of my content in the speech 2 hours before it. So my head was completely off. Remember, third place at the club level. I shouldn't be here in the first place. And so my confidence was shot. 2 minutes into the speech, repeated a line, forgot a line. I gave the best speech of my life after. Why? Why do you think I gave the best speech after I made the biggest mistake on stage that I can make?
Because you didn't care at that point?
That's one way to put it. But
Well,
you're
you
right.
figured You can only go up from there.
I wasn't going to win. My only care that I had now was at least to entertain the crowd and to do the best that I can. And it was the best speech that I had. Because I concentrated purely on the audience. I reacted off the audience. I emotionally connected with the audience. And I did not even come into place. I wasn't even anywhere near there. And I get off the stage, and who's the first person waiting for me? Joe. And Joe's sitting there, a competitor of mine, and gave me feedback and said, Tom, that was great. I said, I know, I flubbed up. He said, who cares? Here are the things you did well, and here are the things that are going to get you to where you want to be if you really, truly want to become a world champion in public speaking. And he was supportive. And I didn't think competitors can do that. But he did. And he once again showed the importance of support and all of us working towards the same goals of making ourselves better at what we were doing. So by joining Toastmasters, I finally got up enough nerve to ask Joe if he wanted to be my full-time mentor. Joe has been my mentor now for about 7 years. Joe has been to the World Semifinals 7 times in a row. Yes, he is my nemesis now. He has won twice, and he's finished as high as 3rd place. He's a phenomenal speaker, and he is making me a better speaker because of it. Well, an hour later, after he agrees to being my mentor, I win a door prize. It's Joe's book and Joe's CD. I have a 5-hour drive back from Canada. I put the CD in, and I listen to him because I've got nothing better to do, driving home from Canada. I read his book that night. He was a principal, and all of his messages were about children and making them better. And I said, well, this is what I do in my professional series on interviewing and resume writing and communication and networking. I'm doing this. I went for a run the next morning. I ran straight to the computer. I put out the outline, and that became my first book, Transformation of the Dowd Professional. My 6th book will be out next month. And I blame Jim. I blame Toastmasters. I blame people who are willing to give me feedback and me finally listening to it. And the message of the first book is self-awareness, belief, and action. Self-awareness that you know who you are better than anyone else out there. And someone might give you feedback. You may not agree with it or like it, but you're at least going to listen to it. And you're going to say, yeah, I probably knew that about myself anyway. Self-awareness, if you are blind to who you really are, personally and professionally, you're going to have a problem. Because you're not going to believe that you can make a difference wherever you are. And that is, you have to believe that you can make a difference, whether it's the organization, make a difference at home, whatever it might be, that you can make a difference and that you are important, that you have value. And then none of that can happen unless you actually take actions. The first action I took was joining Toastmasters. It was admitting that all that feedback they gave me for 20 years was right, and then finally doing something about it. And so the Toastmasters story I shared, and it may not resonate directly with you, but it should hopefully turn a mirror in front of you to say, take a look at yourself and say, hey, are there some things that you can do out there to make yourself a little bit better? Are there some things that you can do to strive just a little bit harder? Are there some things that you can do to be better in school, better at home, better at work, a better friend, a better father? My 5th book was called The Unofficial Guide to Fatherhood because I wrote a book called Wife Lessons, A Husband and Father's Selective Perspective. It's never been published. My wife won't let me. I was like, honey, it's not about you. It's about me learning from you. Still too personal, no way. She's not on social media or anything, so she likes to keep to herself, and that's my audience with her. So I ended up writing this book about fatherhood, and so I couldn't do anything about it. My buddy calls up, who's another author, and he and I were talking about mistakes we've made as fathers, and he said we should write a book about it. I've got material. And so we did that. But it's those things where you become self-reflective of, there are times where I need to be a better father. There are times where I need to be a better speaker. There are times where I need to be a better colleague at work. And the key is we can always strive for perfection, but accept excellence and accept effort to go along with it. So those are the lessons I'll leave you with, unless you have any other questions or comments. I appreciate you guys being an attentive audience. On the back of those cards is my LinkedIn, my Twitter, and all that other fun stuff. Feel free to connect if you'd like. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a note after. Give me a call. I'll be glad to speak to you. Back to
Thank you.